I know folks are trickling in right now. Welcome to our February installment. I'm gonna give everyone about a couple of minutes to get settled in, and we'll start with our resource experts in this conversation around 2:02. Welcome everyone. Happy President's Day to all those who are celebrating and are off. All right, so we can just go ahead and get started now. Welcome everyone near and far, to the February installment of our monthly webinar series hosted by the Hunt Institute. I am Dr. Joseph Emikwao, Higher Education Senior Policy Analyst at the Hunt Institute. THI is a national nonprofit dedicated to supporting and advising education leaders and policymakers nationwide on education issues on the education continuum. HBCUs play a vital role in diversifying the educational workforce, preparing culturally responsive teachers who reflect the students that they serve. By fostering learning environments, HBCUs help address the needs of diverse communities and drive equity in education. So this webinar specifically will explore their innovative approaches and impact on creating a more representative and equitable education system. To support this discussion, we have three amazing resource experts, Dr. Nia Heidel, who serves as the Vice President for Institutional Transformation and Scaling at Complete College America. Darren Rainey Sr., all Black, same with the toboggan on. He's a program manager for recruitment and retention of diverse educators at Delaware State University. And Dr. Asia Johnson, AKA Dr. J, who's a creator and founding principal of HBCU Early College Prep at NYC Public Schools. It can be said that Dr. J is very much still celebrating the Eagles Super Bowl victory from last weekend. So, shout out to her for her victory. So we're going to jump right in, and I'll reintroduce Dr. Nia Heidel, and we're going to start with the first question. Dr. Nia Heidel has dedicated over 20 years to envisioning, planning, and executing strategic initiatives designed to elevate the student experience through her experience in academic affairs, enrollment management, intercultural relations, and student affairs. She earned her PhD in educational policy studies from Georgia State University, a master's in science and higher education administration from Texas A&M University, and a BS in psychology from the University of New Orleans. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Heidel. So the first question I have for you is, how has your work with HBCUs informed your strategies for addressing equity gaps in higher education? And what specific practices or policies have you found to be the most effective in supporting student success and retention at HBCUs and other minority-serving institutions?
Well, thank you, Dr. Kowal. So first of all, I just want to thank you for inviting me to participate in this extremely valuable conversation. There has always been a real need to address the specific challenges of the lack of diverse educators, but with the current national climate, there seems to be a different sense of urgency around really addressing how do we provide educators who are prepared to teach our students, right? So I want to begin by saying you heard where I graduated from. I didn't attend a HBCU. Most of my family did, but that's another story. But I had the pleasure of working at Dillard University, which is a small private HBCU in New Orleans, for about 8 years. And the first thing that I recognized when I worked there, as well as with the number of dozens of HBCUs, as well historically Black and predominantly Black community colleges that I'm working with at Complete College America, is that there's a different sense of care, a culture of care at these institutions where faculty and staff are really incorporating students' whole selves, their whole beings, into the pedagogy, into the learning environment, and not asking students to abandon those things when they show up behind our ivory gates, right? And so I think that's really, really important because what it does is it allows the student to bring their whole selves to the educational experience and to incorporate everything that they're learning and that they have, that they bring with them as students, as learners, as just human beings. And so what this does is it provides an environment for them where they can really excel because
Mm,
they don't have to worry about filtering out the different pieces of who they are in order to be actively involved inside the classroom, which I think is something that we don't pay enough attention to when we're
mm,
looking at creating environments that really will help students of color to be able to thrive, right? And you could say that that's applicable to students of any marginalized or historically excluded population, but I think it's really important to kind of stress that with us. And so when we think about the policies and practices, um, it's like so what that work for students, it's thinking about how do you incorporate those lived experiences into the structure, the infrastructure of the student experience. So when we look at, or when I look at institutions that are doing this really, really well, you see things like housing policies that address students who have housing insecurity so that when you close the residence halls down for breaks, they're not trying to figure out where they're going to stay. You see appeals processes for whether it's academic appeals or financial appeals that accommodate for a student's real life experience. So do they have a parent there who's able to advocate for them? Do you have an appeal process that's happens during the interim of a semester where the student is required to come back to campus, travel to be able to engage in some type of activity or administrative process, which if you have financial limitations, that doesn't support, right? Do you have
mm,
advising appointments that allow for students to be able to log in between work shifts or while they're taking care of a parent or a student? Do you have programming like family programming? I think about that's a big push right now. We want to engage the entire family, and HBCUs are really known for engaging the entire family and making sure that it's not, just you can bring one person, which is what
mm,
happens at a lot of institutions. But the understanding that you need that it's a village that's bringing the student. What happens if you have a student that has a family member that's justice impacted or who is aged out of the foster care system? How do you incorporate them? So I think that when you're looking at policies that really advocate and create environments where students can thrive, you're thinking about all of these things, right? And so then the long-term benefit, so that helps retention, that helps
mm,
progression, that helps completion rates. But then when you think about long-term, think about the educator or the professional or the doctor or the attorney that graduates from there who had an environment that did this for them, then they're more likely to replicate this in whatever environment they're in. And so
mm.
you're training students through your empathy and your policies and practices on how to be an empathetic professional. And I think that that's something that that we don't amplify enough as a benefit and an asset of
Mm.
attending institutions that are culturally focused and really incorporate all of the parts of us who a student brings to the institution.
Well, thank you for that response. I think a couple of things that stood out for me as I've been taking notes over here, right? You said something regarding incorporating live experiences into the infrastructure of the programming that you're having, as that's important to, seeing the outcomes that we want to see, right? You still talked about appointments and family practices. So I think for our viewing audience, there's a slew of things that you described that could really help foster that culture of care that you say are present at HBCU. So actually, thank you for that thoughtful answer.
Thank you.
So I'm moving on to the man in black, Darren Rainey Sr. He's currently the program manager for recruitment and retention of diverse educators at Delaware State. He's also the founder and chief mastermind of Melanated Masterminds, originally from Philly. Wait, hold on. You're an Eagles fan too? All right. Well,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
as y'all can tell, I was rooting for the Chiefs. But Darren pursued his undergraduate studies at Hampton University and obtained his Master's of Arts in Teaching from the Relay Graduate School of Education. Darren currently serves as an adjunct professor and program manager for the recruitment and retention of diverse educators at Delaware State. In his role at DSU, he spearheads initiatives to attract, support, and sustain a diverse educator workforce, emphasizing recruiting, in nurturing Black male educators. Thank you for being here with us, Darren. So question for you is, what innovative strategies has DSU implemented to recruit and retain diverse educators? And how do these approaches address the unique challenges faced by aspiring teachers from underrepresented backgrounds?
Yeah, Dr. Cole, thank you. I appreciate it. And I appreciate the opportunity to be in this space with you all, some dope human beings, Dr. Johnson and Dr. Hiddell. As I think about the work that we're currently doing at Delaware State University, it's not lost upon me, right, that the tradition of teaching, right, the Black teaching tradition, right, stems out of HBCUs, right, and has largely been cultivated over time at HBCUs, and we can't have a conversation around diversifying the teacher pipeline without understanding that once upon a time, the teacher pipeline was pretty diverse, right? And it was as a result of policy decisions post Brown versus Board that pushed Black and Brown teachers, leaders, principals, superintendents, right, out of the profession, right? So if we have to understand it, if we are serious about reversing the policy implications, that we got to sit with, right, the implications of our policies and practices over time, and that's something that we've been sitting with and working on at Delaware State University. We think of this in the pipeline in multiple ways, right? So we look at this through the lens of inspiring the next generation of teachers, recruiting them, preparing them, intentionally placing them, and then making sure that they are sustained in the workforce, right? Being able to keep them within the profession by surrounding them with a community that pours into them, that develops them, coaches them, and mentors them, right? So when we break this down, we think about inspiring, right? One of the challenges of inspiring young people to see teaching as a profession is really the perception of teaching currently, right? And how the narrative around teaching has largely been shaped within our society, right? I often argue that it as a teacher myself, that we can be some of the worst recruiters in our profession.
Mm.
But we can also be the best recruiter of our profession, right? And a lot of times when we the research says that the things that this generation of students are thinking about, right, is one, salary and pay, right, the status, and the working conditions of teaching, right? So one of the things we've done is we've invested in a marketing campaign to really reshape the narrative around teaching in the Delaware State University Education Department, right? Our latest marketing campaign got 1 million impressions. It was a digital marketing campaign. It took 18,000 direct clicks on our education department page, not DSU's website, but just the education department page, right? So that what that indicates is that there are students who are interested, right, and inspired in some way to consider education as a profession. And then from there, what we've been doing is trying to get as many students onto our campus and in front of our education department faculty and staff, and our education, more importantly, our education majors, right? Because me, unk, right? I can sit here and talk to teachers, I mean, young people, about why they should teach, but the real powerful voice is the voice of their peers, right? And those who are most proximate in age and experience to them, right? So we focus on getting our education majors in front of young people, high school students, and getting high school students into and on our campus in front of our education majors. One of the other things that we've done just in the inspiration phase of this, right, is really hyping up the teaching profession. We in Delaware every year for the last 2 years have participated in a educator sign-in day, much like we see athletes sign, right, to say, hey, I'm going to play, collegiate sports here. We've done a similar thing, right, where we prop it up at the high schools and in the state and say, hey, I am choosing to teach, and I'm choosing to teach here at Delaware State University or XYZ institution, right? From the recruitment aspect, we one of the things we've noticed is affordability, right, of college, right? The affordability of college has become a barrier, right, to entry into the profession. And one of the things that I appreciate Delaware State University for, right, in the state of Delaware for, is what we know today as our Inspire Scholarship, which allows Delaware students who have above a 2.75 GPA to attend Delaware State University tuition free, right? So for all of our education majors or those who are aspiring to be an educator, right? As long as they hit that 2.75 GPA benchmark, right? They come to Delaware State University, and as long as they're from Delaware, right? They come to Delaware State University without having to worry about tuition, right? Which is a major barrier that's kind of removed from young people entering into the profession. The other thing we've been focusing on is investing in the GYO model, particularly using working with community-based organizations to implement dual enrollment programs and to expose young people to the teaching profession as early as possible. Currently, we have 6 high schools that we're working with across the 3 counties in Delaware, where we're implementing different models of this GYO programming to really cultivate the next generation of teachers earlier than right that 12th grade senior year where we're just like, hey, you should consider teaching, or on the back end where they're where like myself are making a career change, right? Um, Preparation is also important. Dr. Hadel talked about, right, the community of care that exists within HBCUs, and that's something that at Delaware State University we've refocused on, right? And over the last 3 years, we've reshaped our department SLOs to ensure that culturally responsive pedagogy and culturally relevant teaching is embedded in our student learning objectives for our department, right? That's not just at the undergraduate level, but that's also at the graduate level, right? We reshaped our mission and vision, as well as revamped our teacher education program entry process, including restructuring some of our foundational courses, right? So I've had the privilege of rewriting and teaching our Introduction to Education course, our Philosophical Foundations of Education course, and what is currently our Multicultural Education course, but will soon be our Culturally and Historically Responsive Education course, right? To ensure that our pre-service teachers are building a solid foundation um, of just their knowledge base in education that lends itself to being equity focused, justice focused, right, and culturally responsive. And what we've determined is that there should be no teacher who comes out of Delaware State University's education program that is not a culturally competent and culturally responsive educator, right? And part of that, there's the theory to that, but there's also the practice. So one of the things that we've also been very intentional about is making sure that our students get clinical experiences as early as often as possible. And we're in a unique position because we have 3 schools on our campus. Delaware State University has an early childhood lab school where our early childhood education majors get to work directly with young people, right? While they're going through their coursework. We also have our early college school, which Dr. Johnson will talk a little bit more about, you know, the version of that will happen in New York. But we have our early college school, middle school, and high school where students get dual enrollment credits as well. That our pre-service education majors have the opportunity to work alongside teachers at those schools on campus. So, like in theory, right, outside of our elementary school, because we don't have an elementary school yet, but I see one in our future, hopefully, right? In theory, our students don't have to necessarily leave our campus to get that clinical experience that is crucial to developing highly effective teachers, right? And we know that, and that kind of ties into the next aspect of the pipeline that we look at, right? Placement, right? We know that where teachers are placed in their first few years matters, right? We want to ensure that they have the leadership, the support, the coaching, the development to be able to really cultivate them within a profession. So we're very intentional who we partner with as far as districts, making sure that these districts are affording our students the opportunities to grow and develop and be supported, right? And be in a space of in a community of care. The other aspect of that is that have been very intentional about seeking out opportunities to ensure that our students get to take advantage of paid residencies, right, through strategic staffing models, right, working with districts to create those opportunities for our students. And what we're currently in the process of doing right now at Delaware State is adjusting our degree programs to include a full year residency model, right? So shifting from the unpaid 1 semester student teaching to a full year residency model as a part of our program and graduation requirements for Delaware State University education majors. And then the last aspect of this, which I argue is one of the most important, right? because we know it's not necessarily that people don't want to teach, right? But when they get into the profession, when teachers get into the profession, it's the culture of schools that push them right back out, right? The physical, mental, and emotional burdens of sometimes being the only, right? Or particularly when we look at our schools that serve predominantly Black and brown students, right? The mental load, right, and the emotional burdens of supporting that group of students, right, who are experiencing other challenges outside of the school space with limited resources, right? So one of the solutions that we've been looking at really within our department is leadership. In Delaware, a recent study and survey, and I'll share this. This was done through Rodell, showed that 40% of teachers in Delaware are saying that they're leaving because of leadership, right? Another 40% are saying that they're leaving because of policies and practice of districts as a result of leadership, right? I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but I believe it was somewhere around 20 to 30% were saying that they were leaving because of the cultures in schools, which we know is informed by leadership, right? So it's not necessarily that from a sustainment point or a sustainment and retention aspect that it's a teacher problem. It's a leadership problem, right? Leadership is the issue. So that's one of the things that we've been focused on is how do we develop culturally competent and culturally responsive leaders through our graduate programs, right? Who can create the spaces that will cultivate, grow, develop, right? Teachers who want to and will remain in the profession, right? Because it makes no sense if we're bringing all of these students into the profession if we're going to bring them into a toxic culture that's just going to push them right back out, right? So we've been looking at our graduate programs, our Master of Arts in Equitable Curriculum and Instructional Leadership program, which is developing our teacher leaders to focus on how they redesign their schools and their districts for justice and equity, right? Our Master of Arts and teaching program, our Master of Arts and our Master of Educational Leadership program, and our EDD program, which I'm currently a student in, that is focusing on really developing leaders who are culturally responsive and culturally competent. Uh, and in addition to that, right, we not just focusing on our leaders, but also making sure that our students who are graduating from our undergraduate programs have support and community to grow and thrive in. And we've been very intentional, right, in who we develop those partnerships with. So we've worked very closely with Thurgood Marshall's College Fund's Teacher Quality and Retention Program to provide support to our students. That's a 5-year fellowship that extends into students teaching in the classroom, that provides them additional coaching and support, which our students have the ability to take part in. Delaware College Scholars, which is an organization that allows some of our students to get some more experiential opportunities, as well as get additional mentorship and support as they progress in their career. And then our work in partnership with the Center for Black Educator Development, right? Every year we take a group of our students to CBED's the Black Men in Education convening out in Philadelphia, right? And really expose them to that space of like-minded individuals who are thinking about liberatory education, culturally responsive practice, and educational justice, right? To be able to really help embrace our students within that community and show that they are not the only, right? They're not the only ones that are doing this. We work with other organizations like the Delaware Society of Black Educators and the Black in Education Network, where this fall we'll actually be hosting the Black in Ed Summit, which is a summit to bring Black educators together to have real talk, right, and real dialogue about the scenario, the situation and the context in Delaware. And then last but not least, really tapping into our alumni and getting them to come back and support, mentor, and coach and work with our students, right? We've been expanding our outreach to alumni and really bringing it full circle, right? You starting at DSU, going out into the field and doing really amazing work, and then coming back and also being able to pour back into the young folks who are choosing education as a pathway to show that community of educators is strong, right? And once they go out into their prospective schools and districts, that they have people that they can lean on They have a community where they can come to and share problems of practices and thoughts and challenges and get support, right? And that they're not alone, right? And because that's ultimately what it's about, showing educators that they're not alone in this work, right? And that there is a larger community of educators who are doing this work, right, in different spaces in different ways. And that's what we've really been focusing on in our education department here at Delaware State University.
So first of all, thank you for a very expansive answer. I took some notes here. 5 words came to my mind as you were talking. First of all, truth to power, right? You started talking about Brown versus Board and the impacts that had on the Black educator workforce. Passion is what I'm hearing as well as going on at DSU. You guys are very passionate about getting folks through the program and making sure they're covered in culture of care. Resistance, I think of authenticity as well, and I think of intention. So thank you for kind of displaying all that through that wonderful answer. So now we're gonna pass the mic to Dr. J. She's also a graduate of DSU, but she's also the creator and founding principal of HBCU Early College Prep, which is the first institution of its kind in a major metropolitan city. It's designed to honor and advance the legacy, of HBCUs. Holding a doctorate from Drexel University and multiple advanced degrees, Dr. J is also an adjunct professor at NYU and has earned numerous accolades for her transformative impact on education. Thank you for joining our discussion today. So I think it's a great thread from what Darren just shared. How has your experience as a graduate of HBCUs influenced the design and mission of HBCU Early College Prep? And what lessons from your work in culturally responsive practices and systemic equity initiatives can other educators and institutions adopt to create similar transformative impacts?
Well, first, I want to say thank you for having me and also for sharing the panel with these amazing people here today. Darren is making me want to leave NYU. I think I need to come be adjunct at Delaware State University. So sign me up. Sign me up for the mentorship because I love talking to young and prospective people too. So you could definitely count on me for that. One of the things that I think is really important as a proud graduate of the best institution, Delaware State University, my experience has really kind of shaped and designed the mission of HBCU Early College Prep. Attending an HBCU for me kind of instilled this sort of sense of purpose and pride in academic excellence that I wanted to replicate for students in a K-12 setting. I know firsthand from my experience that the power in being educated in an environment that not only affirms your identity, but also kind of nurtures your leadership and holds you to the highest standard of excellence. That is what I received when I was a student at Delaware State University. And it was beyond just having a professor that you talk to that one time, right? I took African American literature twice. I was an English major. And I took Afro Lit 1 and 2. And my professor, Dr. Jackson, I continued to talk to him even though I only took 2 courses from him, right? And that kind of affirmed that he would give me advice. Like he would give us all life advice, even if we didn't want to take it. He would just give it to us. And it was so comfortable for him to help us be a better version of ourselves outside of the classroom, right? And so what was really important at HBCUs is we have HBCUs sort of have long served, been this I don't want to say launch pad for Black success, right? One of my goals at creating HBCU Early College Prep was to extend that legacy to students. And also in their educational journey, I wanted them to graduate from high school, not only with a high school diploma, but also with a college degree from an HBCU that also gives them the career exposure, and also that cultural foundation, right? Being also being from Philly, just like Darren, right? But I have lived in New York City for almost 20 years now, and knowing that New York City doesn't have an HBCU, not an HBI, right? Because we do have Medgar Evers College and some other historically Black institutions, but there's no HBCU there. Knowing my experience, I wanted to bring that to the students in New York City, and I knew how important that was. So through my work doing culturally responsive education and systemic equity initiatives, I've sort of had that representation. I knew that representation, access, and intentionality must be at the forefront in the center of the design of the school. So educators and also institutions that are kind of looking to create this transformative model, it impacts them to sort of move beyond just this surface level diversity effort, so to speak, right? That really is like focusing on systemic change. And I know we're going to get into that a little bit later, but really talking about like curriculum that reflects the student's lived experience, right? And I always tell people, you're not being culturally responsive just because you read a book by James Baldwin, right? Because you celebrated Black History Month or Hispanic Heritage Month, and you're like, oh, Lunar New Year, it's the year of the snake. It goes beyond that, right? And so really what I wanted to do was to make sure that my teachers did have a diverse background. And I do have a commitment to have 50% of Black males hired each year for the next 4 years as I build and cultivate HBCU early college prep. I also want to make sure that HBCU early college prep is a model for what is possible so that we can prioritize equity, but we also integrate real world opportunities as well. So very similar to what Darren is talking about, what they're doing with their college students, HBCU Early College Prep is also doing that with our high school students, where in their senior year, they actually have to go out and complete a capstone project, but they're in an internship throughout the week where they're learning from people in the industry. So when they get into college as a full-time, they hit Del State's campus as a junior, right? They've already taken 2 years worth of college for free. They're like, I know I want to be an aviation major. I know I want to be a teacher. I know I want to be an engineer, right? They've already had those experiences where they got college credit, they completed a capstone project, and they got paid to be able to do that. And that not only incentivizes them, but that helps them to know the direction of their path as well. And so if we truly want change and outcome for Black and Brown students, to collectively what we must do is we must build these institutions that doesn't just teach them, but it also empowers them to lead, which is extremely important in this generation.
Thank you for that. I'm taking notes over here. Something that came up for me is just that word opportunity, the intentionality behind building a pipeline that folks can engage with in a literal sense, right? From high school, and then it's going to take them on and into a trajectory that can help them really be those mental pieces for their community. So thank you, and I know the students in New York City are very excited to come in and join your program very soon here. So thank you for that. So now it's time to have a little bit more fun. We're going to open the questions for all the panelists to answer. Not simultaneously because that'll be too much. But y'all just share the mic. So what role does funding and policy advocacy play in supporting HBCU's efforts to prepare and sustain a diverse educated workforce? And what specific policy changes could amplify their impact? And Dr. Heidel, I will start with you.
Sure. So the first thing I want to say is that we need to also take stock of the education programs across the country at our HBCUs and how we're supporting them financially, because a number of institutions, HBCUs, have had to close their education programs because of cost, because of what Darren was speaking about with lower enrollments going into the education field. And so it hasn't been, and there's an enrollment cliff that's happening nationally. And then you have more and more of the society not supporting students becoming teachers. So it's forcing creating lower enrollments at our institutions, right, for education. So the first thing I would say is we need to reinvest in our education programs nationally at HBCUs. That needs to be a priority. And we need to bring that back. That's the legacy of HBCUs. And so I think we have to start pushing our legislators to realign those budgets to support these programs. Now I know in the current national climate, it's a difficult push, but then we have to go to, like, what is the economic benefit, right? We have a national shortage of teachers. We have we need teachers, and so if we look at it if we present it as an economic benefit to the community, maybe that might be the way to get in, right? It's not the way that makes us feel good all the time, but the bottom line is we want our programs to have solid funding, and we want to be able to attract quality and expert teachers and researchers. So if you have a researcher or you have a teacher, a master teacher who can make a lot more money doing something else, then they have lives and families too. So we need to make it competitive so that they come into our institutions, right? So I think that's really, really important. And we also need, I think it's important to also think about the curriculum around like what teachers are being able to teach. Like, let me give you an example. I have 3 children, but 2 of them are actually in college right now to be teachers. One an elementary education teacher and one middle school teacher. My son, who's the aspiring to be a middle school teacher, he also is majoring in the classics. And so there was an HBCU that he could have gone to that he really liked the environment. He really liked the faculty and everything, but they didn't have a classics program. And so he had to ultimately attend a PWI because that's the only place he could get both. Right. And so, and you might not think of an African American boy wanting to teach classics in middle school, but he wants other African American boys to be exposed to Latin and Greek. And so that's why he's doing this. And so the other thing is when you talk about innovation, that might be a future question, but when we think about curriculum and preparation, I also think about innovation. So what are the different tracks that we have in our programs that might attract students who are thinking they can only do tech or they can only do classics or whatever, and funnel them back into education as a primary career. So I know I went a little bit all around, but the bottom line is we need to really invest, and we need to make all of these people who were educated by amazing educators double down and contribute back to the field that made them and positioned them to wherever they are, and no matter what field they are. We should hold them accountable for that.
Thank you, Dr. Haida. Shout out to the classics and the Black boys who are, reading Latin and Greek. We need that for real. Darren, what you got for me?
Yeah, I think from the funding and advocacy is incredibly important. I'll start with the funding aspect, but actually, yeah, I'll start with the funding aspect, right? Because like I think often as a conversation when we're talking about funding the work, and not seeing the economic benefit of an investment in Black teachers for everyone. We often think that when we are talking about increasing the diversity of the teacher workforce, that we're only thinking about Black and brown students, but increasing the diversity of the teaching workforce, right, doesn't just impact Black and brown students, but all students. Like I think that the research is very clear that teachers of color have a profound impact on academic achievement, social and emotional well-being for all students, right? Not just Black and brown students. And like that's what we should want for all of our students coming out of our schools, right? And HBCUs are uniquely positioned to address this issue, right? In the teacher shortage. However, right, to Dr. Haidel's point, right, like we are not adequately funded. In fact, we've been underfunded for generations, right? At this point. So like if we're serious about ensuring that all of our students have what they need, especially our Black and brown students, right? If we're serious about increasing the diversity of the teacher workforce, then we got to be serious about putting some money behind it, right? Like you're I talking to any school leader or business leader will tell you if you want to know somebody's priorities, look at their budget, right? Where the money goes is what we feel is important, right? So if this is really what we say is important, then we got to fund it. And I think that, right, like uniquely from my position, what I can say is that Delaware has started to fund some of this work, but there's more work to be done, right? And we got to recognize that when we're having a conversation about recruitment versus retention, right, those are 2 different buckets of work, right? So like in my role I serve as the program manager for recruitment and retention, but like, in reality, those could be two different people doing two different jobs, right? But there needs to be funding to support the additional people, right, who can do that work, as well as the programs that will come out of those two different buckets of work, right? The funding, the resourcing, the space, the people, right, is really needed to address the issue of the teacher shortage. And then I'll say from the advocacy perspective, this is some of the work that I do with my organization, Melanated Masterminds, right? Where our mission statement is to reconstruct the hood on the African Center Foundation, and we do that, right, really by developing leaders who are advocates for educational equity and educational justice, right? Particularly the people who are best positioned to advocate, our teachers, right, and our teacher leaders. Like we on two fronts, right? We as teachers and parents have to be advocates and be knowledgeable about the policy, right? The policies that are being implemented that impact our children, right? That means signing up for regulatory commissions, right? So showing up to school board meetings, right? Reading and understanding the policies that are implemented, right? Showing up for open and public comment, right? Both at the city and state level, right? Like that's important, and that's some of the work that we're trying to do through Melanated Masterminds. And that's some of the work that we also do through our at Delaware State University through our Master of Arts in Equitable Curriculum and Instructional Leadership program. And then the other aspect is like Delaware is kind of actually very unique in a sense, right? We actually just elected a new governor who was a teacher, Matt Meyer, right? And he has, I had the privilege of serving on his transition committee to help inform the policy platform for education. And he's got some really unique and promising policy ideas that came out of that, right? So I'm excited to see where Delaware goes, but that doesn't, just because we have someone who is in a position of authority, right, to push this policy doesn't mean that we as the people, right, the teachers and even students, right, and parents don't need to be knowledgeable and continue to push policy that informs our student success, right? Delaware has Delaware 220, which requires school success plans around hiring diverse teachers. We have HB 198, which requires schools to teach Black history from 3rd to 12th grade, right? And HB 318, which requires the same for topics like the Holocaust, right? So like we're in a unique position where we have the legislation in the cover to do the work. Now we just need the people who are activated, right, and knowledgeable to push the work forward. And that's I think that's where the work for us in the state of Delaware really lies, is building the critical consciousness of folks in the community to drive this work forward, to really impact students, right, and to get more of Black and brown people into classrooms.
Thank you, Darren. I love that piece around consciousness and raising the knowledge base. Reminds me of a lot of Kwame Toure's kind of efforts in the late 60s, kind of raise the consciousness level of, the Black Power movement. So thank you for talking about how important knowledge is to this conversation. Dr. J, what you got for me?
I mean, honestly, look, federal funding and policy advocacy is really critical, especially to ensure that HBCUs continue their legacy of preparing and sustaining a diverse educator workforce, right? I've seen firsthand how targeted like federal investments can really strengthen educators' pipeline and expanding access beyond just higher education and addressing systemic barriers that disproportionately affect Black and brown teachers, right? So, but despite this sort of historical contributions, HBCUs have received less funding federally and from the state than predominantly white institutions, right? So that has limited HBCUs' abilities to teach to expand teacher preparation programs, to recruit faculty that look like us, and also provide some financial support for aspiring teachers as well. But a couple of things that I think is like really critical and really important, that federal policy should include, like, one, we do need to increase the Title III funding for HBCUs, right? That is going to help to expand the teacher preparation program and sort of modernize the facilities as well, because I think that's also really important. That'll also help like be more competitive for faculty salaries as well, right? I've heard of a lot of people sometimes who leave universities because they can go somewhere else and make more money, but that school also has a larger endowment as well. And so also in other districts as well is really important if you want to retain your top educators, being able to make sure that there's funding opportunity, paid teacher leadership, master teacher, teacher leaders. New York City has master teachers, peer collaborative teachers, model teachers that also get a set of additional funding as well. The other thing I think is critical is and important is being able to expand the teacher quality partnership grants, those programs that specifically support HBCU-led educators and like residency programs. They also provide, from what I understand, like paid hands-on training for teachers, also those that are in high need schools, right? Because most of the students that are in high need schools look like us. So we want to also have teachers that also look like us as well. Another thing I think is really critical and important is being able to enhance the public loan forgiveness program, right? Like, it's really important for teachers to get like the teach grants and the PSLF forms as well, to make sure that we're specifically prioritizing HBCU graduates that are entering the teaching profession, so that we can, one, reduce the student debt rate for them, and also that's long-term retention. If I'm teaching for 10 years, I'm probably not going to go start another career after being in one career for 10 years, right? But I'm also going to get my loans forgiven because I am working in a public education sector. Another thing that's really, really critical is and important is we really have to pass the Educators for America Act. That is going to help us to really increase federal scholarships. It's going to help us with supporting teacher apprenticeships as well, and like giving financial incentive to educators who really commit to serving in underserved communities. That is really critical and crucial for teachers and HBCUs and Black teachers as well. We also need to ensure that we are really like requiring federal education funding that includes like those direct partnerships between HBCUs and districts as well. I've always said to New York City, like, if we're able to partner with HBCUs, go like partner with Dell State, right? If I was a chancellor of New York City, I hope she's not on here today, like, like, what are you talking about? But like if I had the ability to do so, I would partner with HBCUs across the country. I would go to the schools of education and I would recruit them. And if budget allows, being able to subsidize housing for them, specifically in the neighborhoods also where their schools might live, to prevent it from being a hardship in terms of travel as well, but subsidizing housing for them. New York City already has a very similar program where students are actually, I mean, not students, where it's like a lottery system for brand new buildings that are opening up all across, that we reserve a certain number of apartments for teachers that are coming from other places, where since we can't retain teachers, but having that as a part of a condition of employment as well. But then also making sure that we're making those investments and we're increasing the number of teachers that look like us, that are serving students who are also there. Those incentivizing those that are increasing student outcomes as well. And then also ensuring that there's consistent training and that community of being able to give back to those next generation. But what I think is truly, if we really, really, truly want to sort of diversify the workforce as well, when we want to improve student outcomes, which is the whole point, is we really need to focus in on historically marginalized community. We must be able to invest in the institutions that have been doing this work for generations. And we know HBCUs didn't just produce educators, right? They produce mentors for the next generation. They are equity focused. They are equity centered educators. They are leaders that are prepared to teach these students, right? And our current federal, these like funding of these policies, they must be able to align to that mission and ensure that HBCUs receive those resources that they need, because that's really important for us to be able to not only expand, but then also be able to impact and sustain longevity for years to come. Like, we want to have more teachers who are like, I started teaching at 22 and now I'm 50 and I'm now retiring, and not saying like I was teaching for 2 years and I decided it wasn't a career choice for me and now I want to move on to something else. Sorry, I get like real fired up about it.
Nah, it's all good, and I love this tied to what federal funding could mean as far as an investment in all of the aspects that you all were talking about. One thing that came to mind was Dr. King's famous quote regarding, we're going to Washington to get our check, right? That part of his Poor People's Campaign in 1968. So first of all, thank you all for this conversation. We have a few questions in the chat, and I know we're running short of time, so I'm gonna need y'all to be quick with these answers, I'm gonna do the first one regarding Black male teachers. Essentially, the question is, how do we get more men in teaching, so that if a young man is good in math, he is not encouraged to be a math teacher. Please tell him to be an engineer. Basically, how do we get more people who are really good at these specific topics, specifically Black men, to stay in teaching and not go into industry and all that?
I'll hop into that question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the ways to do it is to focus on impact. In one of his last speeches, Du Bois talked about, right, shifting the perspective of professionals from focusing on profit and how much money somebody can make to service, right, and how to be of service. So I think there's a conversation for us to have around what we are having our young people focus on, right? Is it about making as much money for myself, or is it about serving my community, right? And how are we having those conversations with our young people about what service to the community looks like? And then two, right, the backside of that is like funding and compensating them for the service that they do, right? So legislation like raising the first year teacher salary to $60,000, right, is a critical aspect of that. I always lean back on my military experience, right? And when I was in the military, I had food, I had a sustenance for clothing, I had a sustenance for housing, right? So what are the benefits that we can provide to our teachers who are doing a service, right, to the community? And like, let's have an honest conversation about how we're actually not providing our teachers with adequate benefits as they are providing a service, right, to our communities and to our future generations. And I think that's where the conversation has to be had on both ends.
Mm.
So I just want to add that,
Yeah.
real quick,
No, please,
I
go ahead.
agree. I agree with the need to focus on the increase in men in teaching, but I would say it's the same thing for young women too. So, I told you I have a daughter and a son, both who are in school to be teachers, and both of them were told, "You sure you don't want to do something else? You're going to be poor your whole life. You're going to struggle." And so, but they want to be teachers. So there is this like cognitive dissonance because this is something that they feel called to do, but all of the adults in the room are telling them, but you're going to have a life of struggle and strife if you do this. And so I think that it applies to both. So I agree with everything you said, Darren, around how we change the narrative on what we value and go back to that as a community.
And I also just want to add in terms of getting more teachers in general, it does have a lot to do with what Darren talked about in the research earlier. It has to do with the culture of the school. Students' lived experience in their interactions in school has a lot to do with whether or not they want to be a teacher. There was an article in Chalkbeat where a student said that they were trying to uncover why there was not enough Black male teachers. And one of the students they interviewed, who's an adult, said that he described coming back to teaching as returning to the scene of a crime. And so if you're talking about teaching in that way, that is your experience with school. Why would I want to come and be a teacher when my experience is I'm getting kicked out of class, I can't talk, I can't be myself? Whatever his experiences was made him believe that I would never want to be a teacher. And so a part of it has to do with the culture that you create in your school and in a system that allows kids to feel like, oh, this is a career, in addition to the money and all of the other things as well. I always tell kids, like, do you want to get paid summers off? You know, like, and kids, and that's, I mean, it was a selling point for some, but being able to talk to kids about their experience helps them to help them to understand if that's also a career that will be for them.
The reality of, you know, schools as places for traumas for a lot of Black folks and generations of Black people, right? That's the reality of it. Okay, so we got 6 minutes, so we're gonna do another quick one. There's a question here that I think you guys would be really good to answer regarding quantifying what is needed. You know, how much is needed to build a pipeline of Black teachers through HBCUs? And is there any research that shows the breadth and depth of building a pipeline and receiving continuous professional development?
Well, I can't speak for like the number of things that's needed. I can talk about my experiences and receiving and retaining teachers as well. Specifically worked with a lot of teachers from teaching fellows as well. So those are teachers like mostly career changers or those that would come in as well, and being able to help them to understand the difference between a theory and practice. And these are teachers who are learning, because I was one. I was in a program called Corporate to Classroom in Philly, which was how I became a teacher. And I was my class's third teacher in November. And I was late to my interview and everything. I said, there's no way I'm getting this job. But I felt that Philadelphia at that time was so, and from what I read, is still the same way, was so desperate for teachers. As long as I had a heartbeat and I was willing to show up every day, then I would be able to get this job. And so I had no clue what I was doing. And a part of it is being able to make sure that there is, if we're going to hire teachers that don't have the background knowledge and the support, and they're in graduate school and they're learning how to be the teachers while they're being a teacher, that there is extensive support to ensure that they are not only staying, you know, we're retaining them, right? That we're also have this level of extensive coaching and support that's going to allow them to be able to thrive and see levels of success, because I think that's really important. Not just for me, I went to an HBCU, but again, I was majoring in English. I was going to be a lawyer. So what was really important is that being able to make sure that there's continuous professional development, as the question asks, but that there is also support, on the ground support, that happens to ensure that I can sustain my career in teaching.
Darren or Dr. Heidel, anything to add to that piece?
Yeah, I'll add to that question. I think that's a really actually great question. I made a note of that because that's something I'm gonna do a little bit more digging into because I don't know the total cost off the top of my head of what it takes to rebuild, right, the Black teacher pipeline. But what I do know is that the average cost of teacher retention or teacher turnover, right, is $25,000 per teacher, right? So if you think of this, right, if you lose 4 teachers in a year, that's $100,000 of funding from a school district, right? That could have went to students, right? And when you think about it from that lens, right? Like, what are all of the programs and things that you can do with $100,000 that will be focused on students, as opposed to focus on replacing 4 teachers who you just lost, right? The other thing that I know, and I'll just give like a sample, right? Like, we talked about at Delaware State University, our initiative to inspire, recruit, prepare, place, and sustain, right, our teachers. And I'll speak just to get a glimpse of what it has cost us over the last 3 years, right? Just to run a marketing campaign alone, right? To just market the profession, right? A commercial for a 3-month campaign is $75,000, right? A digital marketing campaign is $30,000, right? So like that's just the trying to get people interested part, right? So I think there's a lot more that we could do to unpack what it costs on a year by year basis at an HBCU, just one school, right? And then kind of try to quantify that. But yeah, I think that's a very interesting question that I think we definitely need to sit with and think about what the cost is, right? And I'll yield there.
Yield. Dr. Heidel, do you have anything to add before we wrap up?
So I was going to say, just to emphasize a point I made earlier, the economic imperative. So sometimes people don't invest, or politicians don't invest in these different things because they don't, because of whatever the diversity component of it. But when you start to use numbers like that, $100,000 here, $200,000 here, sometimes that's how you make your move. And so I think that when we're looking at the challenges that we're facing now, we need to also start to frame some of these policy these needs in terms of an economic imperative in order to get the movement that we need to get the ultimate outcome, which is more teachers with culturally responsive from that space.
Thank you. Yeah, cultural responsiveness is always at the root of things. So it's 3 o'clock now, so I don't want to hold folks up. So I'm just going to wrap up here. First of all, thank you so much for an enthralling and a timely, powerful conversation, Dr. Heidel, Darren, and Dr. J. We're going to be sharing this webinar out to our various channels. And, before we leave out, I do want to share a quote that I pulled from Frederick Douglass right before this conversation. And I think it encapsulates what we talked about very well. So he says, power concedes nothing without demands. It never did, and it never will. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress, right? So power to the people, and everybody have a good day. Enjoy President's Day, and we'll talk to y'all soon. Go Birds, I guess, right? All right. Bye-bye.